Before the MCU, there was the Raimi Spider-Man movies. Before that, there was the X-Men. Before that was Blade. And before that was a series of pretty sizable embarrassments, but movies based on Marvel properties began in the most dubious of manners. Technically, you can go back to the old movie serials based on Captain America or point to the TV movies of the 70s with Spidey, Cap, and Doctor Strange, but in reality, when we're talking about Marvel on the big screen...
In the beginning there was... Howard the Duck.
This movie, which came out in 1986, starts off letting us know that we're not exactly on Earth with these two suns, and we're introduced to Howard, who, you guessed it, is a duck. His planet has things that all have duck puns, like Breeders of the Lost Stork, which doesn't make much sense considering the original title had nothing to do with ducks. Like, if the divergence is that this world is pretty exact except that it's ducks instead of apes, then wouldn't the title be the same? Suddenly, a weird event pulls him in his chair through the apartment, letting us see duck boobs, thank goodness. Do I have to censor duck breasts? It feels like I shouldn't have to, but I guess that I will, just in case. Howard lands on Earth, and let's talk about this suit. At times, it's a live actor in a full bodysuit, and in others, it's a puppet. Meanwhile, there's a bar band led up by Marty's mom, and this version of Cleveland is actually way more cinematic than 80s reality was, and seems to have post-apocalyptic cycle gangs roaming around for some reason. Howard saves Beverly from some alley thugs using,
quack foo!
Again, why would it be called quack foo? It's not like we call it human foo or something. He doesn't even quack while doing it. And you know, this is all pretty silly, but can I tell you just how hard that the John Barry score is working here? It's just making this whole thing epic when it's just a guy in a duck suit rolling around. She takes him home and checks his wallet, and he's from Washington, D.C., and they don't call it date of birth, but date of hatch, and your hatch day. And see, I'll accept that. That's a logical divergence from our reality. That makes sense. But what doesn't make sense, mallard card. And the money still says Washington, so go figure on that. And the fact that he just has a loose condom in his wallet, like not in a wrapper, just a condom. Bev takes Howard to see Andy Dufresne, and he determines that Howard's world came from ducks, and Howard gets a job. And was he about to bite this woman's ass? Is this a duck thing? Is that from his world? Why was this his response? Howard encounters a young Richard Edson.
I don't know, Chinch, I heard something about that on the news.
That's right.
And he makes up with Beverly.
What's a pizza?
So their worlds are the same with minor divergences that all seem duck punned, but they don't have pizza? That night, Howard appears to be attracted to human females, and they get into the same bed together, and like Bev is down. I guess she's meant to be joking, but is she? I want to point out that in the comic book, Howard and Beverly are totally porking. They're an actual couple. But then Jeffrey Jones comes in and seems repulsed, like, come on, we know what's on your hard drive, you scumbag. Seems Jennings here was part of an experiment with this big space laser that accidentally brought him here to Earth, and they can use it to send him back. But when they turn it back on, something goes wrong. They end up on the Lamb with Jennings in tow, who is being taken over by some alien force, and they end up in a diner called Joe Roma's Cajun Sushi, which sounds completely repulsive, and yet I would still go try that. He gets served eggs.
What's white, ovoid, and always reminds me of my birthday?
But why is it your birthday? Shouldn't he have said Hatch Day? That's what it's referred to on his license. Jennings goes full Dark Overlord, kidnaps Bev, grows a dick tongue, and Howard and Phil give chase in a small plane. Then, and this is notable because this movie's pretty lightweight and silly, but the Dark Overlord kills this cop. I'm pretty sure he's the only guy killed on screen, but he's dead. Now, the Overlord has taken Beverly because he said earlier that his race couldn't survive on this world without first being in a human body to gestate. So he has her strapped to the machine, and they say he's trying to bring another one down. This lab also has something called the neutron disintegrator, and I'm so glad they have something like that just in this lab with no guards or anything. Just a freaking neutron disintegrator in this place, you know, in case you need it. Howard and the Dark Overlord have a showdown, and the DO blows up, revealing its true form, because I guess it's been in the host long enough, and look at this thing. This is awesome 80s stop motion. Howard blasts him with the laser, killing him and saving the day. But the machine is bringing down more Dark Overlords, so they decide to destroy it to stop them. But why? They've already established that a race needs to inhabit a human to exist there. Just leave. He had Bev strapped to the platform so one could take her over. So I assume the host has to be near to it even. There was no need to destroy the laser. Let them land, die because they have no host, and then later use it to get him home. He becomes the manager of the cherry bombs, and they become a hit, and he dances because why not? I mean, he and Beverly are definitely a couple now. So why wouldn't he dance? Meanwhile, I guess Phil no longer wants to be a scientist, and he's now happy being a stage tech, which is an interesting career choice, but I guess it could be a side gig. But Howard's now here on Earth, all ready for his next adventure. And here's the thing, there was a sequel planned. There was nothing concrete and no script in place, but it's been said that they hoped to continue the story, and the final shot of the film was to insinuate that Howard and Bev were moving forward, and they would pick up from that.
He's my boyfriend!
Real quick, I want to point out that there's this huge misconception that this film was directed by George Lucas, and this may be because the film's famous poster shouted, "George Lucas presents," pretty big right above the title, but he only produced it. It was actually directed by Willard Huyck, who was somewhat of an unknown entity, although he had done a few films before this and worked with Lucas on Star Wars, American Graffiti, and Temple of Doom in a writing capacity. He had just had a film called Best Defense released in 1984 with Dudley Moore and Eddie Murphy that was not particularly well received, so this was his biggest venture to date. And make no mistake, this was a big venture. This came out in 1986, the same year as Aliens, and the subject of my previous failure to launch Big Trouble in Little China. In that video, I pointed out that Big Trouble had a decent-sized budget at around $25 million, and showed how Aliens, a film that I think most people would presume had a bigger budget, was made on $18.5 million. Howard the Duck had a budget of between $30 to $35 million. Ponder that for a second. That's almost double the budget of Aliens, which is, yeah, that's insane. Trouble began from the get-go with major disagreements about how the film should be handled, and you see the original comic book that the movie is based on was not a lighthearted humor book. It was a social and political satire with a grumpy lead character offering commentary on the current events of the 1970s. People discovering the book now look back on it and see it as this odd, surreal adventure, but the bizarre elements weren't just random, they were direct parodies of pop culture of the era. It was also a strangely artistic book with an emphasis on existential despair and the concept of finding one's place in the world. None of that is in the movie. During the screenwriting process, the order was made to emphasize the special effects and adventure aspects of the story and to downplay the satire to keep more in line with a summer blockbuster kind of feel. There was also some contention about having the film in live action, since Hayek and Lucas wanted the film to be animated, but the studio disagreed due to cost and time factors. The shoot was equally troubled, going drastically over schedule and over budget due to the complex nature of the effects. They were continually refining the techniques of bringing Howard to life, and as they would create new technologies and more advanced puppets, Hayek would eventually go back and reshoot previous scenes to include them. After everything was in the can, though, that's when the real problems began. There was a screening for the Universal executives, and when it was complete, they simply left the theater without saying a single word. The studio became nervous about the product that they had and started doing test screenings, which were very mixed. Hayek actually states that he thought that they went very well and audiences reacted well, but producer Gloria Katz has also claimed that she tore up the majority of the negative comment cards to show a more positive response. Ultimately, they couldn't do the same for the critic responses, and the vast majority of advance word was very, very bad. Gene Siskel in particular came down hard on it, calling it a stupid film. Other reviews ganged up on the Howard suit, calling it unconvincing, and plenty of comments about the overall story, and others complained about the tonal inconsistency, since it was clearly a very sanitized version of the character to appeal to a mass audience, but then also included those previously mentioned duck boobs and play duck and condom jokes. It also faced some stiff competition coming out in an extremely big summer for genre films. Again, like I mentioned in the Big Trouble video, Aliens took a huge chunk of that season's sci-fi lovers' money, and the week that Howard was released, the week of August 1st, the James Cameron sequel would indeed again take the top spot in its third week of release. Second place was claimed by the debut of Friday the 13th Part 6, featuring the return of Jason. Howard, in turn, took third place, pulling in $5 million. Coming in after Friday 6 really stung, considering that film had a $6.5 million weekend, but the budget was only $3 million, so it was already profitable. A $5 million weekend was only a small portion of what they spent here, and it was very clear that they had laid an egg. It would go on to only pull in around $16 million during its total run, and the overall negative response and massive money loss cemented the film's reputation as a dud, and any and all talks about a sequel immediately ceased. It would go on to be nominated for a bunch of Razzies and won the Worst Picture of the Year award, and was even nominated for their 1989 Worst Film of the Decade award, but lost to Mommy Dearest of all things. Fallout from the failure was almost immediate. Leah Thompson panicked about the film and jumped onto Some Kind of Wonderful right away, although she had previously turned it down. And I have to say, that bit of info made me a little skeptical of Leah. I love her to death, but she said yes to Howard the Duck and no to a John Hughes comedy. I'm sort of doubting either her or her agent's instincts back in the 80s. The biggest consequences seem to have come for Hayek, who would never again direct a feature film or TV. He basically moved out of the film world entirely. Over time, most of the people involved with the film have had nicer things to say about it, but its rep as one of the worst movies of all time and one of the biggest box office bombs of all time were widely spoken of. Of course, in reality, it wasn't that much of a bomb. It doesn't even show up when you look at lists of money losers, and calling it one of the worst films of all time is simply evidence that you just haven't seen enough movies. In retrospect, it wasn't even the worst movie that year, because Rollerblade existed, as did Meatballs 3 and Dream Maniac. Like, someone in 1986 was like, what was the worst movie this year? And someone else said, oh, clearly Howard the Duck. And then someone else was like, are we just pretending that Alien Predator is not a thing? And person number 2 said, well, I have no idea what was happening in that film, so Howard it is. Both Marvel and Universal would then spend the next 20 years or so trying to pretend that the movie never happened. Marvel relegated the character to occasional guest star status and had a series of unfortunate legal issues with his creator, Steve Gerber, and after they started having more success on the big screen, they tended to ignore where it all began. Because don't forget,
In the beginning there was Howard the Duck.
But then something happened. In the late 2000s, as Marvel movies started to become a dominating force at the box office, opinions started to shift on Howard. There was suddenly this nostalgic glow to the film, and more people started accepting it as a bona fide cult classic. He started having more comic appearances, even getting his own title back for a while, but then it happened. In 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy, a post-credit scene would feature our feathered friend in a cameo. He appears as a member of the Collector's Ensemble, now set free. He's voiced by Seth Green and looks a little closer to his original comics representation and is now completely CGI. He would pop up again briefly in Guardians 2, looking the same, and again voiced by Green. It's revealed that he was meant to have a cameo in Infinity War in a scene where Peter Quill would try to get information from him at a poker game, and while some reports state that he would have instead been voiced by Ken Jeong, another comment seems to clarify that Howard and Ken would simply be in the scene together, meaning that Green would still voice the Duck. Regardless, the bit was cut, although Howard did still show up for a very brief instance in Endgame, joining the battle, presumably using Quack Fu to combat Thanos' forces. He has also appeared in several episodes of the animated What If show and is very heavily rumored to be playing a part in the upcoming She-Hulk series, although that's unconfirmed at the time. So, even though he's not had his sequel, or even a movie reboot yet, there have been attempts. In an online interview, Rob Zombie said that he had a meeting with Marvel a long time ago and pitched a new Howard movie and said they threw him out of the building. And yeah, Rob, I'd have been right there with them on that one. I'm not sure that we would need Howard and Beverly, as probably portrayed by Sherry Moon Zombie, yelling at each other for 90 minutes in their trailer park. Leah Thompson herself even took a crack at it. She pitched a concept to Marvel that she had hoped to direct, and the development of her idea was assisted by the then writers of the most recent Howard series. Marvel politely declined, although it was stated that they did enjoy her pitch, but I guess the world just isn't ready for Bev and Ducky to be reunited. So there you have it. It's just one movie. That's all it is for now. But very clearly not the last we're going to see of Howard, but definitely the last we're going to see of that version of him. Although, yeah, I have a weird nostalgia for Howard the Duck. I love it very, very much. I actually really liked the comic book when I was younger, even though I did not understand what it was saying most of the time because I didn't quite get the political and social commentary at the moment. But you know, I appreciate that aspect of it quite a bit, and I love the character. I want to see more of it. I'm dying for him to be more in the MCU, however that means. If you agree or disagree, if you hate it and think it's just an awful movie, I get it. I just really like it. But tell me down in the comments down below how you feel about Howard the Duck, and if you want more of the character, and if you'd love to see more, please also, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines, and you can help support this channel like these guys do, who I thank very, very much. And I thank you for watching, and we'll see you very shortly for another great video. Thanks, guys, and bye-bye.